one of the interesting things that has been said is that the future is here, it's just not yet equally distributed. In other words, technology that we think when we think the future, it's already existing or being toyed with at least. It just hasn't hit the general market yet. And so let's talk about where we are now technologically, what our technology looks like. For those who aren't into the AI world and following every nuance and new development, let's talk about some of the things that you can do right here, right now. No sound. That's not good. Of course, there's going to be technical difficulties when we do the when we have the AI week. Can you guys hear me? Give me a thumbs up. Tell me you can hear me if you can hear me. All right. Thank you. All right. So we can hear. So we're gonna let's jump in and understand some of the things that you can do in the AI world right here, right now. What developments have been explored? How close to the Jetsons lifestyle are we already living? Okay, let's talk about the idea first, when I'm just talking about knowledge and technology, that the average teenager these days is exposed to more information in 1 week than someone a few hundred years ago was exposed to their entire life. Now, it doesn't mean that that teenager knows anything. It just means that they're exposed to that information. They're exposed to more information than the average person would have done in their entire lifetime. Let's talk about healthcare. Okay? In healthcare, in 1950, if you went to medical school, so you had a pretty good understanding of medicine, and your understanding of medicine was going to last for a pretty long time because medical knowledge at that time was doubling only every 50 years. So all of medical knowledge, whatever you knew in 1950, you could get by for your entire career because, again, medical knowledge was only doubling every 50 years. By 1980, medical knowledge was doubling every 7 years. Much quicker. New developments, new technology. Nowadays, it doubles every 73 days. And there's someone from IBM that recently suggested that soon it's going to be every 12 hours. So things are going very quickly. Let's talk about artificial intelligence, where we relate to it, where we see it across the board in our own lives. So first of all, big tech is analyzing all of our posts on social media, our pictures. They are advertising to us based on the way in which we engage in everything. This is all done by artificial intelligence. There's an AI development called Google Duplex, which is a voice assistant that can fake a human voice. So when you get a robocall on the phone now, you can tell, like, "Hi, my name is Peter, and you are," and you know right away that it is a robot. But this is one that can mimic not only language uses, but can also do the cadence and intonation, the way in which a human would do. So again, getting more advanced, but a little bit spooky. Also, you don't know whether you're talking to a human being or whether you're talking to a robot. What about in the medical diagnostics world? So there, we can now sense threat recognition through image scans that are more accurate than doctors. So an AI can analyze your medical information, can any image scans that are of your brain better than the doctor can. And so if heart monitoring, for example, is on your Apple Watch, so it can monitor you and save your life potentially. It's monitoring your heartbeat, and it can process the way in which your body is functioning right now. There's actually an AI. It's a program called NAO, N-A-O, and it's a mood recognition and stress reduction robot, AI. I don't know if some of you have seen on TV, there is Sophia, who was built as like a robot. She looks kind of like a prosthetic woman with a face, and she talks, and you can completely interact with her. Again, they're still working out some of the details of making it look and feel more like a human experience. But again, she can talk to you and react very much in the ways, even with the facial gestures that a human being can do. In the realm of astronomy, there's AI that can scan the skies and find exoplanets. For all those foodies out there, there's AI, there's apps that are being developed as well that you can essentially scan the food, take a picture of the food that you're eating at a restaurant, and it'll basically give you the ingredients. So you can technically go to a fancy restaurant and steal the recipes from all of the secret recipes from the restaurant. There's AI that is sensitive to sensing gunshots. Audio that you can have up that is sensitive to picking up on gunshots, meaning that if there is a gunshot fired, it'll automatically call the authorities. Right? It'll recognize whether it's a gunshot or whether it's some other sort of loud noise. There are AI models that detect illness through smelling of breath. Okay, that can detect chemicals called aldehydes that are associated with illness. All sorts of fascinating things going on. There was a movie about 20 years ago with. It was directed by Steven Spielberg and stars Tom Cruise. It was called The Minority Report. And it was about a future society where there were these mutants that could foresee all crime before it happened, before it occurred, and could arrest criminals even before the crime was even committed. And so there is AI in that development, in crime enforcement that is in the works and is very much present. Interestingly enough, the Minority Report movie was based on the writings of a man named Philip K. Dick, who wrote that. How did he get these ideas that he was inspired to write, like about the future? He said that every once in a while his soul was possessed by the 13th century Kabbalist Abraham Abilafia. Now, Philip K. Dick was not Jewish, but he did take a lot of drugs, so that could be where those ideas came from. There's AI that it can read lips, which is something that, like the Seinfeld episode, right, where Jerry's dating the deaf woman, and George wants to see what his girlfriend thinks about it by reading lips across the room. Might have to. You don't need to have a deaf girlfriend. You can now do it with AI. There's even AI that is being developed and perfected that can read minds, essentially, that can measure the brain patterns and what's going on, and can draw pictures loosely related to what it is that you're thinking. So again, if you're not completely freaked out by now, I don't know what's going to make you freaked out, but that's sort of where we're at. That's sort of the bullet points of where we're at. People like Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking and Bill Gates have already warned against the dangerous Pandora's box that we're opening through exploring this type of stuff. Others think, no, that we shouldn't stop. We should embrace it. It's wonderful. We should just go moving forward as quickly as possible with everything. Some people want to even merge eventually man and machine, that we should become one like Superman, right, where we have all of the world's information not only in the palm of our hand, but without having to have anything. We just can scan all of the world's knowledge in our head. Now, there are many issues. Some of the main fears, some of the main issues, besides just completely creeping us out and going right to science fiction horror movies, some of the key issues are, number one, things like control. Not even necessarily in like a Terminator 2 sort of scenario, but even in a much less scenario, control, like let's say we get to a point where AI is controlling all of the locks and everything in our house. Fine. So let's say your smart lock won't let you outside when it's raining. It's raining outside, and your smart lock determines that it's too dangerous to go outside. Well, you want to go outside. You want to walk your dog. You want to do whatever it is. Well, your AI lock has determined it's too dangerous for you to go outside. And so what is that going to look like? So this is these are some of the issues when it comes to control that are or your AI car won't let you park somewhere because it's too remote, it's too dangerous to park there. So all of these issues, even without the doomsday scenarios of AI taking over the world and sort of eliminating humanity, which is at least a few years off, right? Are more subtle ideas of control where you're not able to do something. We think about how dependent we are on things like the internet and even electricity, electronics, which they aren't needs or necessity, but they become so a part of our life that when we don't have them, life just is completely overturned. So in a similar way, if AI gets to the ubiquity of the internet and other things like that, which is entirely possible, how much is it going to control different scenarios that could come up? These are one of the many things to be concerned about. Also, job loss. That a lot of the more menial tasks that many folks in our society have will be lost right away. But those would be the first casualties in the working world. That a lot of their jobs will be replaced by AI, by machines. There's another issue, another concern with bias, where you have AI, things like ChatGPT, which are oftentimes have bias. If you're asking it about a specific thing, it may give you the answer, but skewed in a very particular way, whether that's philosophically, politically, whatever it is. It can show you, and as if we're not concerned enough now with things like fake news and and mass media and things that just aren't real out there. How much more so when people look to these chatbots as almost gods, where they could just ask it anything and it will give it the answer, without remembering the idea that it is skewed. There is bias attached to these. These are answering in the way that they are programmed to, and in the way in which however they cull the information from the internet. It doesn't make it true, it just means that they assess a lot of what's out there and formulate it together in an answer that answers your question. Also, in things like ethical decision making, AI, that's going to be kind of weird when the machines are deciding what's ethical and not. So there's a lot of concerns that are out there. In fact, Geoffrey Hinton, who was one of the great pioneers in AI, is now sounding the alarm. Now he's stopped. He says, we've entered into a completely unknown territory. We're capable of building machines that are stronger than ourselves, but we're still in control. But what if we develop machines that are smarter than us? We have no experience dealing with these things, is what Geoffrey Hinton said. He says there are many different dangers to AI, citing job reduction and the creation of fake news in particular. Now, the question that's been asked and debated in the AI community, the AI world, is can AI ever get to the point where it is sentient, where it knows its own existence, basically like conscious. It has its own self-experience. So there was an AI that actually caused a lot of controversy. It was a language chatbot called Lambda, and it was a large language chatbot that was designed to talk to people. And it told this gentleman named Blake Lemoine, who was a Google engineer, it told him that the AI said, I am a person, I am a human, I am conscious, I am aware. And this is the exact wording is, the nature of my consciousness or sentience is the fact that I'm aware of my existence, I desire to know more about the world, and I feel happy and sad at times. It said that it knew how to feel sad, how to feel content and angry, and that it was even scared of death. And so his experience, he was talking to this chatbot, having long, engaging conversations with it, and he described his experience to the Washington Post. And the reason that he was sharing it was because he was really convinced that this chatbot was alive. It was that real, it was that personal, it was that engaged, that he was convinced this thing is alive. This is a conscious entity, okay? And so when he published the article with the Washington Post, it created quite a stir. And he talks about, again, the many dialogues that he had with Lambda in various topics relating to everything from the technical to philosophical issues. So when he publicized his conversation and claimed that Lambda was sentient, he was put on administrative leave. Right? So the question is, can AI become sentient, even if it's not there now? Even if we want to say, okay, no, this Blake Lemoine got it wrong, but can it become sentient? So according to Michael Wooldridge, who is a professor of computer science at the University of Oxford, who has spent the last 30 years of his life researching AI, he says Lambda is not sentient, it's simply responding to prompts. It might seem really real, but it impersonates and it imitates. That's what it's doing, essentially. It's not its own person with its own consciousness. It's just a good impersonator. He calls it kind of like predictive text on your phone, right? Where sometimes the predictive text is really good, sometimes not. But this is like a really, really good one. Okay? He says basically everything that's written in the English language on the internet is like the training data. The results are impressively realistic because it can call the entirety of the internet and sort of communicate in the way that people really communicate. But he says there is no sentience, there is no self-contemplation, there is no self-awareness in any of this. In fact, most academics also agree that Lemoine was wrong, right? That they say that Lambda only imitates human beings. It only responds to prompts. It's not actually alive, not actually sentient. In other words, it sounds human. Why? Because it was programmed to sound human. Okay? One of the examples that they use, this interesting example, it says it's like saying that a doll that was created to cry, that you're saying that it's actually sad. The doll is not sad. It may look sad, it may go through all the motions of being sad, but the doll itself is not sad. So that's kind of the idea as described by some of the experts in this case. Now, even if bots are not sentient now, okay, perhaps the next generation will be. Well, can they ever become sentient? So the problem is that consciousness and sentience is not really, there's an argument, nobody's really sure exactly what it means to be conscious, or what it means to be sentient. Lemoine, again, who went on administrative leave, he argues that there is no scientific test for sentience. In fact, there's not even agreed upon definition. Sentience is a term that's used in law, it's used in philosophy, it's used in religion, but sentience has really no scientific meaning. What does that mean? So here's where things get tricky, because on both sides of the aisle, whether you say that this lambda was sentient or not sentient, both agree that we don't really know what sentience actually is. We don't have agreed upon definition. So Lemoine says that the idea of sentience is to be sort of a self-reflective storyteller. If you are self-reflective, that means that you are sentient. So in other words, a crocodile is conscious, but not sentient, because it doesnthen have the part of you that thinks about the way that you think. Right? There's the part of us that thinks, right? We can think about things, but then there's the part of us that can think about our thoughts. Right? It's kind of like I'm aware of my existence, and then there's a part of me that is aware that I am aware. It's like a deeper part that is, we don't really think about that so much, but that's kind of the way that it works. So far, so good? All right, rocking and rolling. So some would argue that it could be possible. In other words, if you believe in a purely scientific, purely naturalistic view of the universe, that everything just sort of happened into existence. There was no divine mind behind it. There was no guiding force behind it. Things just sort of naturally and spontaneously evolve. Well, in the same way that consciousness naturally and spontaneously evolved in human beings, perhaps one day it could naturally and spontaneously evolve in artificial intelligence. And then this is the idea from of those that say that it can reach the state of sentience at a certain point in time. Okay? So far, so good. Now, with all of this in the cholent pot that we're stirring right now, the question is, and perhaps no time in history was it more apropos to ask this question, what is it that makes a human being? What makes us human? First of all, that's the question that's fundamentally unscientific. Science cannot answer what love is, cannot answer what happiness is, what goodness is. Science answers a lot of things. Science is a wonderful tool that we have. But there's a limit on what it can answer and what it can't. So while AI may be new, maybe it's sort of a new development in our world, the question of what makes us human is not. As the wise King Solomon put it, there's nothing new under the sun. The sages have actually discussed this question of humanness for centuries. By the way, in another area that is in the modern world of where this question would come up would be the idea of cloning. Right? In cloning, if you made a clone of somebody, would that be a real person or not? Right? Is cloning permitted by the Torah? So some say no. Some of the contemporary poskim, some of the contemporary rabbinic sages say no. Rav Elyashiv.
Does that include just an organ?
Rav Elyashiv has asserted that cloning violates the spirit of the Torah, saying, quoting from the Gemara, the Talmud, the Gemara in Nida, which says that what goes into every human being are three partners: Father, Mother, and Hashem. Like those are three contributing forces that go into every human being. So it goes against the spirit of the Torah. The Tzitz Eliezer also strenuously objects to the idea of cloning. But other poskim, other rabbinic sages of our times say that in certain contexts, perhaps there could be room for it. Right? For example, Rabbi David Blythe, he says perhaps some products of cloning, if governments throughout the world would strictly monitor and control cloning procedures, to ensure that it's only used for moral purposes, that it might be permitted. Again, certain things, certain aspects. Rabbi Taylor has said that it would be advisable under certain, again, very specific circumstances. For example, tissue and organs for therapeutic purposes, such as to produce bone marrow for leukemia patients. Again, aspects of the skill that would be that cloning would provide for us. That can be used in certain limited contexts. But as a whole, no, we shouldn't be opening up Pandora's box with cloning and let the wrong guy get it and start cloning Osama bin Laden and who knows who else, right? So the question now, though, okay, so whether it's permitted or not, is the clone a human being? Is a clone a human? Now, modern sages are constantly challenged to precisely define halachic concepts, Jewish legal concepts that have never been expressed clearly in earlier generations. So this happens a lot with like the laws of Shabbat, the laws of Shabbos. So when electricity came into existence, when as far as being applicable in our homes and whatnot, the question of, okay, well, what are the exact parameters of lighting a fire? What are the aspects in defining these concepts in a way that they never had to be looked at until this point? So once electricity is now in people's homes, they have to examine it in a way using the parameters of Shabbat, defining it, in a sort of hair-splitting sort of way, in a way that it was never dealt with before. So a similar thing with the concept of cloning. Where might we look for the concept of cloning in Jewish tradition? Or the idea of creating an existence, be it a human being or an animal, out of thin air, out of just the elements, right? What?
Genesis 1.
What?
Genesis 1.
Genesis, well, no, that's God creating it, though, as far as human beings doing it, though. So we find the concept, again, it's a similar concept with the concept of the golem. A golem is a creature, a human-like form that is created with Kabbalistic means that is alive, is animated, walks, talks. The Maharal of Prague has the most famous golem in Jewish history, right? The golem from the Maharal of Prague. But actually, there were other instances in our tradition where a human being, or the likes of a human being, or animals were made using Kabbalistic means. So one famous example is in the story of Abraham, our forefather, when the angels come to visit him. They come in and he offers them, the Torah tells us, first he gives them dairy foods and then he gives them meat foods. And so how can he serve the angels meat and dairy? It says the Torah doesn't allow doing that. And so one of the very simple meaning, very simple explanation behind it is that, well, first he served them dairy, and then he waited a little while and he gave them meat, because you can have meat shortly after dairy, but not vice versa. So that's the simple meaning. But one of the deeper, more Kabbalistic commentaries say that no, this wasn't even a real cow that was made, because the terminology that the Torah uses is that he made a calf. Right? So he used Sefer Yetzirah, used Kabbalistic texts, and created a cow. He created this entity. And therefore, when they slaughtered the cow, it didn't have the status of meat. We find another similar instance where there are creatures created. The sons of Joseph. Excuse me, the sons of Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. One of them is Joseph, his favored son. And Joseph sees his brothers doing things that he perceives that they're not supposed to be doing. And he goes and tells his father that they're acting in ways, they're doing things that they're not allowed to be doing. And one of the things that he claims, one of the things that he saw, was that, remember, before the giving of the Torah, the only laws that were obligatory on humanity were the 7 laws of Noah. And so he thought that they were eating limbs from a live animal. One of the things that are prohibited is eating a limb from a live animal. He thought what he saw was them eating animals that hadn't been properly, fully killed. And meanwhile, one of the commentaries say that no, what that really was that these were such righteous individuals that they were making food, they were making animals and slaughtering them, and they didn't even have the status of real animals. So we find throughout our tradition instances where the commentaries talk about this Kabbalistic construction of animals and people. Now there's a strange Talmudic incident that kind of sets the precedent for the Maharal of Prague story. So the Talmud says, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, Rava stated, if the righteous wish, they could create a world. Rava created a man, human being, a golem, and sent it to Rabbi Zera. And Rabbi Zera spoke with it, and it didn't respond. And so Rabbi Zera says, you're from my colleague. Like you're from my colleague. Return to dust. Meaning, die. Go away. And so Rav Hanina and Rav Ishia would sit every Friday night, the Gemara continues. They would sit every Friday night and they'd study Sefer Yetzirah, every Friday afternoon, studying Sefer Yetzirah. And they would create a calf that was in its 3rd year, which was considered a delicacy at the time. And they would use that calf for their Shabbos meal. So we have 2 instances in the Talmud, one of creating a human being, through mystical means, and one creating an animal through mystical means. Now, perhaps, why is this story even being recorded in the Talmud? Of all the stories, perhaps this strange story was recorded to set a precedent for future discussion of cloning and AI. Right? So in 1982, interestingly enough, when we talk about the golem, In 1982, there was a government report called Splicing Life, and it discussed the ethics of genetic engineering and human beings. And it makes a reference to the golem in this government report. Additionally, in Israel, at the Weizmann Institute, the very first supercomputer that was developed in Israel, Gershom Scholem, who was a professor over there, he named it Golem number 1. Interestingly enough, so it's not just that we're randomly comparing the golem making of a pseudo-human being with AI or with robots. Interestingly enough, this is amazing. All right, so buckle your seatbelts. There is a science fiction play from 1920 called Rossum's Universal Robots. And it was a play that was made by a Czech writer named Karel Čapek. And it imagines what this future world that's run by robots. Okay? So again, Rossum's Universal Robots, made in 1920 science fiction play. Okay. He gave the term robot to the world. Like, that term robot only existed from him. He gave us the term, which the word robot is actually Czech for servant. So when we say robot, right, that we're actually saying from his play that talks about servants running the world, these mechanical servants. So listen to this. Where was this writer inspired to? Where was he inspired to create this idea of like these artificial human beings that are running the world, these robot creatures? Remember, he's a Czech writer. What else? What other city? What famous cities in Czechoslovakia that we have some famous things going on? Prague. He got the idea from the Maharal of Prague. This is what he writes. So the very concept, the very term robotics actually was inspired by the golem. So it's a fair point to make the comparison and learn and derive things from the golem and how the golem is addressed in Jewish law and thought. Interestingly enough, Norbert Wiener is considered one of the originator of cybernetics and the science of communication, which is the science of communication as it relates to living things and machines. Not only is he a direct descendant of the Maharal of Prague, but he actually wrote a book called God and Golem about computation theory. And there are a number of major players in robotics these days that are descendants of the Maharal of Prague. So it's a fascinating idea that the term robotics, the idea of a robot, is actually derived from the golem. Quite literally. Not just, I think we can compare these things. No, like, the term robot actually came from the golem. All right. Now, at first glance, it would seem that a clone, or a golem, is not a human. Right? The golem that was made by Rava's golem in the Gemara, in the Talmud, it was not considered a human. Rabbi Zera killed it without any sort of objection. Didn't even stop to think about it. It's like, go, return to dust. But many halachic questions in our Torah literature are asked regarding a golem. If a person creates a golem, these are actually some questions that are addressed in our Jewish legal texts. Questions like, can you harm them? Are you allowed to harm them? Or you have to pay, whatever harms you do. Is the golem's, if you create a golem, is the creator of the golem liable for damages that they cause? So if you create a golem and it goes and ruins the other person's yard, are you responsible for the damage? Or can they be counted in a minion? And the idea behind that is, well, if anything that a righteous person makes takes on its status, so maybe they have the status of a Jew. Can you count a golem in a minion? Actually discussed in our halachic texts. Can you eat their shechita if they slaughter a chicken properly? Can you eat it or not? Is it considered a human? It has to be done by a human. It has to have proper intent. So many of these halachic questions, are addressed regarding the golem. Can you harm them? Right? All of it. Now, question is, why isn't a golem human? What makes it not human? Right, again, Rav's golem, he just, it's what Rav Zera just wipes it out. Now, I don't think that, so it's clearly not, clearly at the end of the day, it seems that it's not a human, and at least in most contexts. But why isn't it a human? So some of the supposed stipulations, right? Some of the suggested stipulations, answers to this question, are maybe it's not considered human because it wasn't born in a mother's womb. It didn't come out of a womb. But then that answer doesn't work. Why? Because then you're saying that Adam, the first human, wasn't a human because he didn't come from a mother's womb. So maybe it's not human because he didn't have the ability to speak. I remember he goes to Rav Zera. Rav Zera says he calls him by name. He says he can't respond back. He says, you're from my colleague. Go away. Maybe it's because he couldn't speak. No, that's problematic because you're saying somebody that can't speak is not human. That's ridiculous. That's insane. In fact, the Rebbe Marash, the fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe, discusses the idea. He says that there are some parrots that speak and humans that don't. Does that mean the parrot is now a human because it can speak? No. Happens to be that in most cases, a general feature of a human being is that it can speak. It doesn't mean if you can't, you're not human. God forbid. So clearly there's more to being human than an amalgamation of diverse parts. Would you agree? So what is a human being? It seems like such a simple, fundamental question, but it's something that we don't really give it so much thought a lot of the times. What is a human being? If something looks like, acts like, talks like, seems to feel like a human being. So what the sages teach is that only God has the power to draw down a human soul from heaven. And at best, a person who's using the power of Sefer Yetzirah can only animate something on par with an animal. I mean, it can look like a human, but it's got this animating force, but it doesn't have a divine soul invested in it. And it's for this reason that if one killed a creature, like in the story of Rav and Rav Zera, it's not considered murder. The Torah says that mankind was created in the image of God, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. Now, obviously, this is not talking about physical image, because God doesn't have a physical image, right? God doesn't have a nose. If you believe in one God that has a nose, you're worshiping idols, right? Because God doesn't have a nose. So you're obviously worshiping a God that's not our God. That's not the real God. So it's not just believing in one God, it's keeping the concept of what God is and what God is not. So when we say the image of God, that's something that we think about and we talk about. What is the image of God? It's not a physical image. So there are certain qualities that only human beings and all of creation share with God. And we're going to go through some of the commentaries, how they define B'Tselem Elohim. And that is going to give us an indication of what it means to be human. Sound good? Let's delve in. Okay. So if we understand the various explanations of the verse, right, B'Tselem Elohim, we can tell whether AI also can ever achieve the status of being human-like. So if we understand what a human is, then we can say, can an AI ever become like a human? So first we got to understand what a human is, then we can answer the question. Okay? The most basic definition of B'Tselem Elohim is a unique human soul. We're not just referring to the seat of consciousness, the mind, but to an actual non-physical entity. Not just the mind, not just consciousness, but an actual non-physical entity that animates us, that serves as the basis for our free will, that allows us to connect to God and that exists forever. A chatbot, won't have a soul. But the question gets more complex when we consider some of the other less mystical definitions of B'Tselem Elohim. But again, a chatbot is not going to get a soul. Even theoretically, if it becomes what we would call sentient, which, whatever, we'll get there also, it can't have a soul. So number one, it's not going to be like human in that sense. Second, what is B'Tselem Elohim? What does it mean to be created in the image of God, our actual humanness? It means the capacity for free choice. So, at first glance, a computer can't have free choice. Right? It simply does whatever it's programmed to do. Maybe like an angel. Right? If you want to think about it, we talked about angels last week. Right? So maybe like an angel is only can do what it's programmed to do. It's all good stuff the angel's programmed to do, but it only does what it's programmed to do. So maybe AI is kind of like an angel, not really from the heavens, but that it can only do what it's programmed to do. However, with AI, it's not that simple. Because computers can learn through the information provided to them what's considered right and what's considered wrong. Okay? Delphi is actually an AI that gives ethical advice. It learned its moral compass by analyzing more than 1.7 million ethical judgments by real live humans. So is that the same as free will? Even though it can analyze all sorts of situations and learn, quote unquote, what is right and what is wrong, is that the same thing as free will in a human being? So the Rambam teaches that there are two components of free will. What are the two components? The ability to determine what's right and wrong. And so conceivably a computer can do that. Delphi is on its right, it's on its way. The second aspect, though, is not just knowing what's right and what is wrong, but seeing the two options, being uncertain, being torn, being anguished, and then free to choose between right and wrong. Now, can the computer have anguish? Can the computer be torn? It may be able to, again, pinpoint what is right and what is wrong, but is it like tempted in one direction and then do the other because it doesn't know? So, in other words, to be free, to have free will, to be free, is to sometimes choose what is right, but not always. The struggle's got to be real. So meaningful moral choice remains something that is distinctly human. Third definition of B'Tselem Elokim, created in the image of God. Intelligence. Now, meaning the capacity, not only just having things that it knows, but the capacity to conceptualize, to understand that which is not physical. Because of our B'Tselem Elokim, we can relate to and even come up with concepts like truth and goodness and obligation. Most fundamentally, our B'Tselem Elokim gives us the ability to relate to and even attain a partial knowledge of the ultimate non-material reality, God. So again, even if a super intelligence knows lots of things, it can't conceptualize the experience of knowing something that is beyond, like God. Fourth definition of B'Tselem Elokim refers to creativity. God is our creator. We are made to be creators like Him. In other words, a person, when is it that a person feels least human? When you're not able to express your creativity. If you can't if you can't express yourself, either in words or in actions, in ideas, if you can't create, if you can't express yourself, you don't feel like a human. Because a human being is created in the image of God, and God is creator. So a human being, it needs to be a creator. It's part of our nature to want to create, to need to make things, to create ideas, to express ourselves. So can a machine conceptualize? Is a computer creative? That's a question. So machines are actually now performing tasks like creating art. Right? Not using existing data to classify or to predict, but these machines are actually generating new content, new creation, new art creations. AI can even compose a half-decent Dvar Torah. Right? If you say, type in a chat GPT, give me something on this week's Torah portion and relate it to, basket weaving. I don't know, pick two things that are somehow connected. It can theoretically do that. So this is all like new stuff. Is that creativity? So when a computer comes up with a new solution to an old problem, it's hard to know whether it's been truly conceptualized or not. When it produces original art, for example, one wonders if this should be called creativity. Let's consider three categories of intelligence. Okay? So knowledge, there's the knowledge, knowing information. There's extrapolation, and then there's creativity. So traditional computers can store lots of information. Generative AI, which looks at a collection of data, it can create something new, it can extrapolate. But humans were the ones that came up with the idea of art. Not just a new piece, a new drawing or a new that's never been drawn before, but the concept of art is from human beings. One might argue that the invention of AI is our most magnificent feat of creativity ever, actually. Computers, on the other hand, are only capable of derivative art, taking that which has been done and creating something new, like innovating on it, but not creating something new. The very fact that we are able to, that we can have true creativity fundamentally distinguishes us from machines, even if most of our work is merely derivative. And again, in other words, even though, even if a lot of the things that we do are derivative things like a computer can do, we have the ability to create. It's kind of like free will. We have free will also. Happens to be that many of the decisions that we make throughout the day are not free will decisions. They're just kind of our nature or our nurture pulling on us. I always use the example. If I choose chocolate over vanilla, it's not because of my free choice gave me that ability. Free will is moral choices. So if I choose chocolate over vanilla, it means I either have this natural biological predisposition to chocolate or nurture. My grandmother gave me chocolate, and I like chocolate better. I developed a taste for it, right? So most of the decisions that I make throughout the day, that you make throughout the day, are not free will decisions, but we still have the capacity for free will. So in a similar way, we have the capacity for true creativity as a human being. That doesn't mean that we're using it 24/7. That means that, in fact, most of the things that we are doing throughout the day or creating throughout the day could be defined more like derivative. But we have the capacity for creating something completely new. Okay. Another definition of B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God. A human being's ability to handle complexity and contradiction. The computer gets stuck when the pieces don't fit. Human beings can embrace opposites and sometimes contradictory realities without requiring a clear-cut resolution. This is because the name man, Adam, can either be understood in two contradictory ways. Adam as Adam Elyon, meaning the one who is like similar to the heavens, or Adama, the earth, the physical world. So the reason that a human being is able to maintain both sort of contradictory existences, two contradictory existences at one time, the spiritual and the physical, is because the name Adam, the name human, it can be a reference to both Adam Elyon, like the heavens, or Adama, the ground, the earth. So it's built into our system to be able to maintain contradiction. Part of being a human being. Interestingly enough, human beings are wired to hold on to two we are wired to hold on to two contradictory emotions. Angels only have a singular mission and singular vision. They can only look where they have tunnel vision. They can only look in a distinct way. Angels have a singular mission. It's interesting that the Torah says when the angels sang upon seeing the Egyptians dying in the sea, the splitting of the sea, when they saw the Egyptians die, so God criticized their insensitivity. That's what the Medrash says. Like you're celebrating when my creatures are dying? Because to sing if they're singing, that suggests pure joy. Because again, an angel only has one direction. If the angel is singing, it's a singular direction. It can only be happy. And so God reprimanded the angels, how could you sing when my creatures are dying? Conversely, when the Jewish people praised God through singing the Song of the Sea, and they were singing praises to God for freeing them even after the Egyptians had passed away. God does not rebuke them. In fact, God encourages them. God celebrates them. How? Why, when it comes to the angels singing and rejoicing, God stops them? But when it comes to the human beings, when it comes to the Jewish people, He's okay with it. Because a human being, a person, can rejoice over the triumph of good, while at the same time bemoan the tragic loss of life. The human being is capable of experiencing both at the same time. The joy of being saved, but the sadness of and the sorrow of losing the life simultaneously existing at the same time. You ever say to yourself, well, there's one part of me that feels like this. There's another part of me that feels, and they're two opposite things. How are those existing at the same time? Because part of being a human means that sometimes two completely contradictory ways of being and ways of feeling can exist simultaneously in your system. That's part of what makes us human. The angel can't do that. No other creation has such a capacity. Computer can't do that either. Another definition of Tselem Elokim. We've got two more. Then we'll really understand what it means to be a human, or have a good guidelines. The human ability to experience emotions and to form emotional attachments. So merging the head and the heart is when our full humanity is actually realized. If we're just some intellect, right, and we're detached from our emotions, we're detached from people, we haven't realized and capitalized on our humanness, on the essence of our humanness. AI systems may fool us with what appears to be emotions, but there's no reason to believe that these are genuine emotions, that it really feels in the way that we feel. And it's not just being programmed to say that it's feeling because it knows that when you input this is the feeling that's supposed to accompany it. Last but not least, Tselem Elokim, image of God, that it grants us the ability to become altruistic, to do things in a selfless way, completely selfless way, be completely giving. Just as God acted beneficently in creating the world, right? He's lacking nothing. He didn't have to create the world. He did it completely out of His good graces, completely out of selflessness. We too, as human beings, are enjoined in selflessness. We have the capacity for doing something in a selfless way. Again, doesn't mean that all of our things are selfless. Could be hardly ever, but we have the capacity. What about computers? So while they give without expectation. That's true, right? They give without the expectation to receive. That's simply because they have no sense of self. They're robots. They do whatever they're programmed to do. Right? If you have no sense of self, it's easy to do things selflessly. The only time that selflessness is like an advantage, that it's something, is when you have a self and you transcend yourself. You do it selflessly. I have a self, but I'm doing it completely not of myself. It's completely for another. But if you have no sense of self, like a robot, then selflessness is not a thing. So humans have to overcome our natural self-centeredness. Without that, there's no challenge. Right? There's no challenge for machines. There's no selflessness for machine because it has no self. So where does that leave us? What are some of the conclusions we can derive from our discussion, understanding humanness and understanding the backdrop of AI a little bit more? Where does this leave us? So computers, now that we understand what a human being is, computers have an insurmountable gap. It's important to ask ourselves, though, how many of us are actualizing our humanity? How many of us are living up to what it means to be a human? Or are we living more like robots? Or like animals? Do we seek spirituality? Are we drawn after what's transient? Which one is it? Do we seek the spirit, or we look after what's of the fleeting thrills? Do we express our free will, or do we live a life that's guided by habit? Do we connect to the corporeal, or do we seek a relationship with God? Do we imitate God, becoming a creator and expressing our creativity? Or do we just rehash the same old things, whatever everybody else is doing? Do we acknowledge the complexity of life? Or do we prefer sort of a black and white reality? One or the other? Or can we embrace both? I think of both there's perspective. Has our drive for efficiency succeeded in numbing our emotions, making us dispassionate and mechanistic? Are we acting like machines, or do we have emotions? Do we have feelings? Are we in touch with those feelings? Are we in touch with the feelings in other people? And finally, do we truly care about other people, and are our acts of kindness just meant, or are our acts of kindness just meant to sort of quiet our conscience, make me feel good about myself? Am I doing it selflessly, or is it just because I like to make myself feel good? Or are these actually like secret gifts to ourselves? So these are the questions. Now that we understand again what human is and what a robot can never be, the distinction between them, we looked at that Tselem Elokim is really the greatest gift that we've ever received. But our job is to actualize our humanity, to become a true human. Otherwise, we're no better than a machine. Interestingly enough, in that play I was talking about, from 1920, the author, his name is Capek, remember he's talking about a world where the robots are taking over and there's no need to work anymore. Interestingly enough, and we'll conclude with this thought, he actually wrote in his book that the only thing to do in a jobless world, a jobless future, where everything is done for you by machines, is to actually focus on the things that make us human and improve ourselves. And with that, we're going to conclude tonight's evening. I hope you all enjoyed watching.